My daughter left home today. She went off to college. She took a gap year after high school, so she was at home a little longer than expected. But finally, it was time. Our bilingual journey together lasted 19 years, starting on the day she was born. I've forgotten a lot of other moments in my life, but I still vividly remember that first moment I held her in my hands. After 19 years, I can now share the final results of my bilingual aim for her. Of course, there's no endpoint to language acquisition. Even as adults, our language ability can continue to grow, and naturally this will be true for my daughter for the rest of her life. So these final results aren't really final, but this is the outcome to this point at the end of her childhood years at home. I'm Adam Beck, and this is Bilingual Super Kids, the channel that can help you experience greater success and joy raising bilingual or multilingual kids. So my daughter is now 19 and my son is 17. They're both bright kids, but it's important to understand that they're not somehow exceptional. I mean, they've both worked hard over the years, but the outcome of our bilingual journey isn't really about their inborn nature. It's about how their language development has been nurtured. I think this is good news because it means that any average family like mine can experience similar results. It mostly depends on your own actions, which is something you have control over. You don't really have control over your child's basic nature. Let me also stress that I'm not at all interested in boasting about my kids or about my efforts. The purpose of this video is simply to describe the results I've achieved and the actions I've taken to produce them. So my daughter is going to a large university in Japan, and she's majoring in global studies. Throughout childhood, she attended only Japanese schools, but her major in college is taught in English. And the majority of the students are international students from other countries. In order to apply to this program and other programs taught in English at other universities, she had to take 2 English proficiency tests, the TOEFL and the SAT. She did really well on both tests, but I was particularly pleased with her score on the SAT. The SAT is a test that's mostly taken by high school students in the US for college admissions there. And among all the students who took the test that year, again, mostly American students, she managed to score in the top 7%, even though she never attended an English-speaking school. And whatever English classes she had in her Japanese schools had a much lower level than her ability and weren't really very helpful to her language development. So how did this happen? How did she acquire a level of ability in the minority language which enabled her to get such strong scores on these 2 proficiency tests? The answer lies in a wide range of actions that began when she was born. I'm not suggesting you have to do everything I did to realize similar results, but I would say that the more you can do, the more you'll be able to advance your child's ability in your minority language over the 18 or 19 years of childhood. So today, I'll summarize the main actions that I took. I hope my example can be encouraging to you in your own efforts. And if you'd like to learn more, please visit the links you'll find in the video description below. Basically, it all comes down to the amount of exposure and engagement that a child receives in the target language. The more exposure and engagement, the more progress can be made. In my case, I was very conscious of this right from the start because I had been a teacher of bilingual and multilingual kids before I had kids of my own. And so I knew I needed to be very proactive, especially because there were some big things working against my bilingual aim. 1, I was the main source of exposure to English, but I wasn't the main caregiver. 2, I was working full-time at the newspaper in town. I was able to start doing my work from home when my kids were still small, which made the situation so much better for my bilingual aim. But those first few years were very tough. 3, my wife's English level is low, and she uses only Japanese with the kids. 4, my kids have only attended Japanese schools, as you know. 5. We could only travel to the US every few years, so my kids have spent very little time in an English-speaking environment. So in some ways, my situation has been pretty challenging, which also means I can empathize with parents who face challenging circumstances of their own. The truth is, conditions like these, which are working against your bilingual aim, make the odds of success inherently low. To raise these odds, you have to do whatever you realistically can to create conditions that are more favorable for success. So here's exactly what I did over the past 19 years to promote exposure and engagement in our minority language. Let me begin by saying that the whole challenge of raising a bilingual child is like putting together a huge puzzle. And the many pieces of this puzzle are the various actions we can take. But unlike a typical puzzle where the pieces are all roughly the same size, the pieces of the bilingual puzzle are different sizes. Some of the pieces, some of the actions are much bigger than others. In other words, they have a much bigger impact on the child's language development. The biggest piece of this puzzle is very simple. It's ample oral input from speech. That means talking a lot to the child. The truth is, I'm not normally a very talkative person, but input from speech is the single biggest factor for fostering language development. And so I've always been extremely talkative when I'm with my students and my kids. There's plenty of research which supports the idea that the more oral input we give our children, the more we can nurture their language development. And not only does more input have more impact on our children's progress, it means that we're being proactive about spending time with them and engaging with them. So along with language development, this aim to provide oral input can positively impact your whole relationship with your child. That's actually one of the very best things about raising bilingual kids. On top of my own efforts in this way, I also sought out other speakers of our target language for even more oral input. 2 examples are hiring an international student to play with my kids in English once a week and regularly hosting homestay guests from various countries. So I encourage you to provide as much oral input as possible, both from you and from other speakers of your target language. The second biggest piece of our bilingual puzzle is reading a lot, maintaining a daily read aloud routine. And again, there's plenty of research on the powerful impact of reading aloud on language development, as well as on literacy development and the child's interest in books and reading. It's important to remember that there's a difference between the spoken and the written forms of a language. Writing tends to be richer, more sophisticated than speaking, which means that reading aloud will enable the child's language ability to become richer and more sophisticated too. In my case, I began reading to my kids from the day they were born, and I've continued reading to them day after day throughout childhood. Even after children are able to read on their own, I strongly recommend that you still continue reading to them, even when they're older. You see, children can understand at a higher level than they can read. A book that they might not want to read on their own because it's hard for their current reading level, they can still enjoy it and benefit from the input when it's read to them. So if you stop reading to your kids when they start to read, it's a huge missed opportunity to continue providing them with years of this rich, sophisticated input. Of course, to read to your kids every day throughout childhood, you need a lot of books. So you have to be willing to grow a large home library with suitable books at every age, and perhaps supplementing the books you buy with books from your local library. Even if your local library doesn't have books in your minority language, I bet they'll have some wordless picture books. And wordless picture books can be shared with children in any language. Just talk about the illustrations in your own words. Talking a lot and reading a lot might be the 2 biggest pieces of the puzzle, but there are a number of other big pieces too. Before I continue with 5 more of the main actions I took that helped fuel my children's language development, Please be sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video before you leave. I'm grateful for your support. When my kids were small, I regularly played music in the background. Back then, I simply used an old CD player and CDs of children's music, and I would keep the music playing as much as I could. And hearing this music while they were playing on their own had an even bigger impact than I expected. What happened was, after hearing the same CDs over and over again, they started singing along by themselves. And even more amazing to me is the fact that they can still remember the words to these songs. A few months ago, we took a road trip to visit college campuses, and as a joke, I brought along some of these old CDs. They hadn't listened to this music in years, but when I played it in the car, they started singing right along. So it's very clear that the music they heard when they were much younger had a deep impact on their language development. Playing music for your kids is easy input, and it's even easier these days with digital music and streaming services. I also recommend looking into audio players for kids that can tell pre-recorded stories or even allow you to record your own stories for the child to hear anytime. Examples are the Tony Box and the Chameleon Reader. I was also very intentional about playing with my kids. Besides engaging with them when they were playing with their toys, I was proactive about playing with them in several other ways. When I was a teacher, I began collecting games like board games and card games, and I often played these kinds of games with my own kids. But I emphasized cooperative games when they were small because children tend to get upset when they lose a competitive game that has winners and losers. And when a child gets upset, this undermines the whole point of playing the game in the first place. In fact, they might associate the minority language with negative feelings. And that's the opposite of what we want, right? We want the child to have positive feelings toward the target language. For good cooperative games, I recommend a games maker in Canada called Family Pastimes. And since most games for younger kids don't involve reading, you can actually play them in any language. Also, because I was a teacher, I was familiar with a lot of active games that are designed to get children using the target language in fun and productive ways. I even created the ebook, 77 Great Games and Activities for Getting Your Bilingual Child to Speak Your Language, to compile these ideas for other parents. To get a copy of this really useful resource, please see my comment below this video. And one more way that I played with my kids was through role play with scenarios like a shopkeeper and a customer. For instance, when my daughter was around 4, she loved pretending we had a pet shop with stuffed animals or a supermarket with plastic food. We also used a toy cash register and play money. These sorts of props help make the role play more engaging and effective. I would start as the shopkeeper to lead the dialogue and model it for her. This dialogue was just improvised, but of course there's a basic pattern to a role play involving a shopkeeper and a customer. My daughter loved these role plays, and she wanted to do this every day for a while, even to the point where I got really tired of it. But I still did it every time because I knew how valuable it was for both her language development and for our relationship. Another productive action was something I call captive reading. And like background music, this is the kind of action that can produce additional exposure and engagement without the parent needing to be physically present. The basic concept for captive reading involves taking crafty advantage of the child's literacy once they begin to read. It's like a public bathroom, okay? I don't know about women's bathrooms, but men's bathrooms often have advertisements above the urinal or on the door of the toilet. And if your eyes fall upon these advertisements, you read them. You cannot not read them because it's a kind of automatic reading response. When we're literate and we see some comprehensible text, we automatically read it. So in a similar way, once my kids started to read, I began posting suitable text in our bathroom on the wall right next to the toilet. For me, our small Japanese bathroom was the perfect captive location. I started doing this when they were around 3 or 4 with simple words, and I've continued doing it over the years, changing the text every 2 or 3 days. Of course, these texts gradually got more and more sophisticated. I started with simple words, then continued with simple sentences, riddles and messages, short stories and nonfiction passages, and eventually news articles. Some of these I've created myself, and others I've copied from books or printed out from the internet. Through this ongoing strategy of captive reading, I've been able to create so much more opportunity for my kids to read in the minority language and develop stronger literacy and overall language proficiency. Another key action that began at around age 3 and has continued through high school is a daily homework routine to gradually nurture literacy in the minority language. This routine has consisted of giving them a manageable amount of reading and writing tasks each day that takes about 15 minutes to complete. When they were still small, I would sit with them and we would read together and do gentle writing tasks like a page in a dot-to-dot book. Then, when they entered elementary school, I could prepare the tasks in advance and they would complete them on their own after school. And after dinner, I would go over the homework with them individually, which took another 10 or 15 minutes for each child. The reading tasks have involved reading a certain number of pages in a book of fiction or nonfiction, or doing a workbook to practice reading skills, or using materials to prepare for a proficiency test. The writing tasks include keeping a journal where they can write about their lives and do creative writing too, like stories and poems. We also used workbooks to practice writing skills, and I helped them write letters to family members and other pen pals. Of course, maintaining a daily homework routine takes a strong, ongoing commitment. But this kind of regular practice for reading and writing is vital in order to reach higher levels of literacy in the minority language. And one more main action has been providing suitable screen time in the target language. TV, videos, movies, and apps on a tablet. In my view, screen time should be considered supplemental exposure, supplemental to all the other more interactive exposure that the child experiences. And in this way, it can be very enriching by stretching the child's language development and knowledge of the world. I also used screen time as a kind of incentive for completing their homework or other tasks. For example, when we got our first iPad, I made it an English-only device by installing only apps in English. And because they were eager to use these appealing apps, this reward of iPad time, 20 minutes or so, helped them stay on task and complete other things first. Plus, by emphasizing media in the minority language from a young age, both music and screen time, they developed a preference for media in this language. Today, even though they also enjoy these things in Japanese, they continue to consume a lot of it in English on their own. So these have been the bigger pieces of the bilingual puzzle for us. Talking a lot, reading a lot, listening to music and audio, playing a range of games, maintaining a captive reading strategy, sustaining a daily homework routine, and providing screen time as supplemental exposure. However, to carry out these actions effectively, you also need a steady stream of fresh resources coming into your home. If you don't have enough resources, it's much harder to fulfill your good intentions. The more resources you have and the more suitable they are for your kids at each stage of their childhood, the more exposure and engagement you can create. And the more exposure and engagement there is day by day, the more momentum and progress you'll produce over the weeks and months and years of childhood. So books and other resources like music and games and apps have been an enormous priority for me throughout my family's bilingual journey. When it comes to resources, here's my basic philosophy. One day when my daughter was about 9, she said to me, "Daddy, we have too many books." Now it's true that we had a lot of books. If you saw our small house at the time, you probably would have laughed because there were books everywhere. But you know what I told her? I told her, "Too many books? You can never have too many books." So how about you? What are the main actions you're currently taking to create exposure and engagement in your minority language? And can you strengthen these actions in some way? At the same time, are there any new actions you could take that might help generate more momentum and more progress for your bilingual aim? Feel free to share your thoughts with me in a comment below. And to learn more about my work and how I can help you experience the same kind of rewarding results on your family's bilingual or multilingual journey, please see the links in the video description. Thanks, and I hope to see you again soon at Bilingual Super Kids.